Miss Anne Charlotte Lynch has written little. Her compositions are even too few to be collected in volume form. Her prose has been, for the most part, anonymous, critical papers in the New York Mirror and elsewhere, with unacknowledged contributions to the annuals, especially The Gift and the Diadem, both of Philadelphia. Her Diary of a Recluse, published in the former work, is perhaps the best specimen of her prose manner and ability. Edgar Allan Poe, The Literati of New York, No. 5, Godey's Lady's Book, September 1846. Leaves from the Diary of a Recluse, by Anne Charlotte Lynch Botta. From The Gift, A Christmas and New Year's Present, 1845. January 1st, 1830. Today it occurred to me that I would keep a journal. The reason I have not done so before is because I have thought that, where no events transpired, as here, and where one's mind dwelt so uniformly as mine has done on a few general conclusions that have given me the darkest views of life, a journal would be a most monotonous document. What can have led me into such clouds of dark thoughts? I shall never forget with what contempt I turned away from B, who told me I should outgrow melancholy. But lately his words have often occurred to me, and I am half inclined to believe that melancholy is but another name for ill health and want of air and exercise. Ennobling thought that all these immortal longings, these aspirations that neither earth nor heaven can satisfy, this perpetual moaning of the soul for sympathy, like the seashell for the waters that should fill it, that these should be the results of a fit of indigestion. No, it cannot be so. It is the struggle of the soul when she feels for the first time her fetters, as she wakes from the unconsciousness of childhood, bewildered with the mystery around her. Aspiring, doubting, despairing, she at last falls, overcome with her own violence, and when she rises from the shock, it is with the subdued serenity of middle age. I am often inclined to laugh at the inverted notions of things I used to have, but before a smile is formed, tears get the start of it. Reverence, O young, the delusions of thy youth, says Schiller. It is traitorous to our own hearts, when we alone have witnessed their agonies and known their indefinable desires, thus to turn the world's evidence and join in the smile at their vain aspirations and fruitless struggles, and betray their weaknesses. No, my poor heart, never again will I jest with thy delusions, or the tears it has cost thee to part with them. Little indeed hast thou found of sympathy or love in the world, and now that thou wouldst cast away the mantle of the ideal as unfit for the blasts and frosts thou must encounter, and wouldst gird on thy shrinking form the protecting armour of philosophy, though thou totterest with its weight, I would not bereave thee of thy last stronghold, the sympathy of thyself. Second, I quite like journalizing. It will be company for me, and this is what I most need. To be thus the cannibal of one's own thoughts is horrible. To move among our fellow beings wrapped in ourselves, invisible, scanning the actions, compassing the petty motives, too often detecting other qualities than virtue, this drives us back upon ourselves and teaches that there is no bond that mocks at fate like man's with his own heart. Moore says in his Life of Sheridan that the knowledge we acquire in maturity and from inclination, in contradistinction to that received through the medium of the birch, has about it a freshness the latter can never possess. This is my daily experience. Knowledge breaks upon me now like light upon the restored vision of the blind. I thank fortune that I was such a paragon of idleness in my childhood. I am far from being free from it yet, however, though it is quite time. 20 years of a life is sufficient for hibernation. I am really pleased with this new acquaintance myself. She is more companionable than I thought she would be, after being neglected for a lifetime. Not that I have had no thoughts, but they were shadowy from not being expressed in language. Why then have I never written before? I believe it is because life has seemed of too little importance to record even a feeling of its weariness. But that state has passed away. There is sublimity to me now in existence alone, to know that I am a part of this infinite, mysterious creation, a conscious atom, capable of beholding the beauty and immensity of the universe. This is indeed worth a life of suffering. Third, it was my intention in commencing this journal to express some of the thoughts that have agitated me for the last 2 or 3 years. I have never given them utterance before, not because my heart was not aching to do so, but because I have never met those who cared what I thought, or who would understand me, perhaps, if I told them. Goethe says somewhere that he was possessed of a surplus of sentiment, and as he could do nothing else until he had disposed of that, he wrote Werther. And I have an accumulation of egotism that I must throw off here, or I shall not be able to proceed. The action of mind is always interesting to me, particularly when it is under the influence of strong emotions. Until I was 17, I was a mere child in thought and action. I think it was studying natural philosophy, albeit I studied sparingly, that first gave an impulse to my latent faculties. That was the deep felt ray that loosened the avalanche of thought, which, rushing with rapidity and violence through my devoted head, left despair and desolation in its track, and stopped not in its mad career till it reached the very outposts of the universe, till it had boldly questioned time and eternity of their secrets, and nature of her author. Then my mind, to drop the avalanche, stood still, overwhelmed with doubt and confusion. It had flown beyond its natural atmosphere, and could not breathe the rarefied ether that surrounded it. Like the meteoric stones that by some strange convulsion are elevated, almost without the sphere of the earth's attraction, but yet revolve with it, until some other change once more precipitates them into its bosom. Here have I been these 3 years in this unenviable state of betweenity, till now, suddenly and by some unknown cause, I find myself once more on a mental terra firma, and on the whole, if no wiser, I think rather better for the jaunt, in this state of feeling of which I have been speaking. But for a few ties, life would have been an intolerable burden. As it was, I often deliberated on the question of throwing it off. To me, love, fame, ambition, avarice were the same, each idle, and all ill, and none the worst, for all were meteors of a different name, and death the sable smoke where vanished the flame. To trace the cause of this state of mind, it would seem to have arisen from the intellect's being suddenly excited to action, and then continuing to act without any regulator to its motion, so that it was tossed about like a boat without rudder or ballast on a stormy ocean. If I had then formed the habits of industry I now have, or had become more interested in study and society, I might have been spared much suffering. It is keeping aloof from the bustle and conflict of life, and looking at it through the cold medium of reason, that makes us chilled and indifferent. As often in a ballroom, I have been an uninterested observer, till I became at last an excited actor. He is wrong, then, who calls this indifference to life and the consequent misery, in one who idealizes rather than acts, the effect of an overwrought imagination. It is no fancy, it is indeed the truth. All is vanity, but he errs, I admit, who dwells morbidly on it. There is somewhere in Bulwer's Asmodeus at large the story of a youth who, thirsting for forbidden knowledge, would lift the painted veil that men call life. To escape from the horrible sights that his newly acquired power reveals to him, he flies to his mistress, but as he approaches her, he discovers no whole but 1,000,000 of lives, loathsome and awful. It had such an effect on me when I read it, that I cannot think of it now without a shudder. The external world is beautiful. Turn which way we will, to the heavens, the sea, the earth, we are dazzled and drunk with beauty. To the graceful forms of animals, and our wonder is lost in admiration. to our own species, to the soul-lit eye, the blushing cheek and the intellectual brow, and our delight is deepened into love. Life itself is a pleasure, the power of motion in the invisible supporting air, and the thousand exquisite sensations we are so delicately constituted as to receive every moment, are in themselves sufficient to make existence almost rapturous. But woe to him who would penetrate those regions of darkness and doubt that lie beyond the natural boundaries of his mental vision. He is like that lover who, not satisfied that the cheek of his mistress blushes for him, would decompose it to its frightful elements, till, horror-stricken, he turns from the hideous sight. I have not then been acting or thinking falsely, but only foolishly. Henceforth, since there is a bright side to human life, let me keep my eyes steadily fixed on that, and, if possible, be blind to all else. With this page, let there be an end to all horrors. 5th. Just finished Latrobe's travels in North America. He says, "No man can pass over it, from east to west, from north to south, without bringing away the impression that if on any part of his earthly creation the finger of God has drawn characters that would seem to indicate the seat of empire, surely it is there. The desire to travel has been a passion with me for years. If the body is always confined, the mind must remain so in some degree, despite reading and thinking. It convinces us that we are not indeed the center of the world, and that the sun shines on other lands and other races. Once my ideas of the delights of travelling were more highly wrought, as my knowledge was more limited, but knowing the facts instead of the poetry has not diminished the desire. It has always seemed to me that our country presented a noble field for a national poet. The elements of poetry are here, and want but the master hand to combine them. These elements are its immense extent, its varieties of climate and scenery, its noble rivers, its boundless prairies, its primeval forests, its aborigines, the sudden dawning of the continent like a radiant vision on the eyes of the old world, and lastly, its present government and the glorious revolution that established it. 7th. Just read The Court and Camp of Bonaparte, and I half regret it, for the writer with his faint praise has succeeded in belittling Napoleon, in my eyes at least, much more effectually than Scott, whose prejudice is so apparent that one sees at once that for him nothing good could come out of France. This other writer, instead of dazzling us with glimpses of his comet-like career, gives us petty details that destroy the whole effect. The reading of it is like going behind the curtains at one of those dioramas, which are very beautiful if seen in the proper distance and light. Of all that flattered, followed, sought and sued, how few adhered to the emperor in his fall. What a bitter disappointment to a young and generous nature to find that the world is indeed made of such materials. I used to have a sort of poetic creed that it was selfish, cold and ungrateful, but at the same time there was a latent hope that it might be poetry after all. It remained for experience, corroborated by history, to demonstrate its sad reality. 8th. Today I read a book of travels, a poor thing enough, but interesting to me, as it describes the scenes my earliest dreams have dwelt upon. Can it be that my presentiments will never be realized, and that I shall die without seeing those lands, when I have envied even the waves that kiss their sunny shores? The author seems to belong to that class of persons who are neither poets nor men of common sense. Poets often lack common sense, or rather, see everything through a poetic haze, and nothing with vulgar eyes. For instance, Lamartine, in his pilgrimage to the Holy Land, while our own countryman was disputing with his guide about the bucksheesh, belabouring his donkey, or amusing himself with his servant Paul's personation of the disciple at Jerusalem, he was weeping in holy raptures, prostrated before the sacred relics. Lamartine was a poet without common sense. Stephen's a man of common sense, without a spark of poetry. Both are delightful in this case, but I like best those characters which unite these qualities, and where they are united the best poets are produced, that is, poets who delight all, and Goethe says, "The poet deserves not the name when he only speaks out those few feelings that are his as an individual. Only when he can appropriate and tell the story of the world is he a poet." None but the most poetical minds read Shelley, while the most ordinary appreciate Byron. But I am getting into difficulty, for I really think Shelley the greater poet of the two, so I must think it over again. Today I have been so lonely. This loneliness I generally contrive to keep at bay by intense occupation of some kind. Yet there are times when this fails, and books offer no consolation, when I want a living, breathing, sympathizing friend. But mashallah, as the Turks say, I am fast reading Constantinople and its environs. As long as I do not travel, I have a strong desire ungratified, and this has something to do in producing happiness, I think. It has always seemed to me that perfect happiness and perfect misery were nearly allied, because both states are hopeless. I remember reading a story of two lovers who died of being perfectly happy, and paradoxical as it seems, I fully believe such a thing might happen. 12th. The last volume of Smollett's continuation of Hume I finished last night. Thank heaven it is read through. It appears to me that Hume is overrated. Though his history is good as a reference, and it may be a duty to read it, it is hardly a pleasure. He could not easily be more uninteresting. 14th. Read Burr's Memoirs. I recollect a little incident Mr. T. told me of him. At some place where he visited there was a pretty child, of which he was very fond, and often brought it presents. Caressing it one day, the child playfully put her hand in Burr's pocket. Mr. T. said he should never forget the look of scorn with which he cast the little girl from him. He never spoke to her again. Whatever may have been his faults, it is melancholy to see an old man like him walking among his fellow men scorning and scorned. I have a fellow feeling with misanthropes. That is, I can understand how a noble nature should turn from the mass of its fellow creatures too often with pity or contempt. It should be pity. Pity for their selfishness and petty malice, their stupidity, living in such a world of wonders, where every pebble and every blade of grass is a miracle and a mystery, yet living and dying with scarcely a thought above the sod that at length covers their dust. Yet were we made to soar. May not genius be a disease? Oh dear, it is dull talking to oneself. One wants contradiction sometimes. 20th. Since I wrote here last, I have stood by the dying bed and followed to her narrow home my friend C. Oh, heaven! What a scene! To see the dread conqueror clasp in his embrace the form we have often caressed, and the cold, damp earth heaped over the bosom that cherished high aspirations and warm affections. Tonight I have been to the grave. 1 week since I spoke to her, I held her hand, I kissed the cheek that daylight may never more look upon. Answer me, burning stars of night, where is the spirit gone? How strange that though I have often thought of death, and even meditated hastening it, I never till now knew the weight of mortality. Hereafter, let me live with the last hour before me. I have not loved my friends enough. I have been exacting of their love, and avaricious of my own. How mad, how insensible I have been! I see myself in a new light, an intellectual and moral being, by a mysterious destiny brought into existence, borne irresistibly along towards a gulf which I cannot fathom, and over whose depths hang clouds dark and impenetrable. Every moment hurries me along, and yet I ask not, I think not, I know not, to what. 21st. The moon is beaming silver bright. The stars are looking down with a melancholy gaze. I have looked on them a moment, since they are the very same that inspired the fantasies of Plato and Pythagoras. There they shine with their pale, sad light, and Plato and Pythagoras are gone, and generations have vanished like the waves that have broken on the seashore. Myriads of eyes have looked on them, myriads of beings like myself have lived, loved, and died. Yet they are not changed. I look upon them tonight a few more years, and I shall see them not, but still they will shine on. What is humanity amidst such a universe, and what am I? The very trees under my window have lived longer than I can live. My life, the very breath of heaven can destroy it. Races and generations are nothing. The mighty machine rolls on and sweeps them away. Father of light and life, Thou alone knowest the conflicting thoughts that agitate my soul. Give me a right spirit, and guide me in the way of truth. Thou only canst know my desire for it. Make me submissive to thy decrees, and prepare me for whatever fate awaits me hereafter. 23rd. This has been a wretched day to me. I have had another of those paroxysms of tears that I vainly thought had ceased forever. I thought their fountains were dry. Struggle on, brave spirit. Thou dost buffet the billows right bravely. Storms of wild thoughts have rushed over thee. Thou hast fed on the gall and wormwood of existence. Thou hast made idols and hast found them clay. Thou hast looked over the broad universe for one spot where thou mightest repose, but in vain. All is inhospitable, dark, and forbidding. Back thou comest to thyself, weary, but finding no rest, yet thou dost struggle on. Courage, good heart, thy pilgrimage shall soon be over. And though no beam of brightness breaks through the gloom of the future, yet on the mercy of thy Creator thou mayest calmly repose. 24th. This has been a day of continued occupation, and all the thinking that I have done has been to wonder that I could possibly feel so wretchedly as I did yesterday. My occupation has been nothing less than overturning the garret and restoring it to order. As garrets and poets are often connected, perhaps there is something inspiring in the air of one. I feel so well I am ashamed. I have no more sympathy with what is written on my last page than a child. I have but one feeling, that of perfect health, with the liveliness that always gives me. There is an animal for you. I wonder how everyone can look so doleful and mope about so. And yesterday I was on the bed crying my eyes out half the day, in the most hopeless melancholy and despair. All this for breathing the air of the garret, but I shall have another day of rapture tomorrow, gathering paper, rags, emptying old bandboxes, and packing bundles. After that I suppose I shall sink again to the level of the second story and the companionship of musty books. 28th. Finished Guizot's History of Civilization in Europe, a clear and concise view of its progress, speaking of which he says, "Thus man advances in the execution of a plan which he has not conceived, of which he is not aware, and comprehends by its results alone. Conceive a great machine, the design of which is centered in a single individual, though its various parts are entrusted to different workmen, strangers, and separated from each other. None of these understand the work as a whole, which he concurs in producing, and thus, by the hand of man, are the designs of Providence wrought out in the government of the world. Thus it has often appeared to me that we are the instruments of some great and unknown end. But I forbear to speculate. I have been quite ill today from a blow received on my head yesterday, on being unceremoniously thrown out of a sleigh and dashed against a fence, and but for my quilted bonnet, that honoured member, my head, would have lost all sensibility to pains and aches. As I was riding home, I amused myself with thinking how little force was wanting to have quieted me forever. Then I should have been unconscious. There would have been the same bustle, the preparing of coffin and shroud, that there was here a few days since. They would have buried me, canvassed my merits and failings, wept a little, and there it would have ended. In the hearts of a few the shock would be great and lasting. But I have been so long separated from all I love that even were I to die, I should be scarcely a loss to them. Oh, this waste of the affections, this hoarding of them up as the miser does his treasures, till they rot and rust. It is death, it is worse than death. To live in such a desert as this, I must be made of sterner stuff than many. I do not forget my books. They indeed are all my consolation, but they are like the sun in this wintry day. It shines. It lights up the earth with 1,000 beautiful hues, but it is distant, it is cold, it warms not, though it gives us light. How often my heart aches for a kind word, an approving smile, from someone who loves me. But perhaps this is weakness. February 1st. Read Mary of Burgundy. The Lord of Hainaut says, "Hidden within the bosom of this mortal clay is some fine essence, participating in the affections of the earthly thing it inhabits, but thirsting for knowledge beyond this world, and yearning for joys more pure and love more imperishable than the joy and love of this world can ever be." I regret that I do not write here every day. When I think of all the thoughts that have passed over my mind like shadows across a mirror, and left as little trace, it is always with a feeling of regret. And yet why should that be cause for regret more than that the beautiful clouds will disappear, and the flowers and leaves? A beautiful thought is not more beautiful than a flower, yet we see myriads of them die without leaving a trace of their existence, and never sigh for them. Why should we for lost thoughts? 3rd. I determined to write a page here, good or bad, every night. But last night I had no fire, and tonight I have no ideas. I said to B today in my letter that some years ago my imagination took the reins of my mind and drove off after the manner of Phaeton, leaving the other faculties to come up at their lagging pace. Thinking of it again, I am sure it is so. Poor C, how soon I have forgotten her. I have often asked myself if I were willing to be as lightly thought of. I answer, yes. While I live, I am avaricious of every breath of affection and love my friends can bestow. But after I have ceased to be conscious in the oblivion of the grave, or have passed into a higher and holier state, why should I demand the tears and vain regrets of those who loved me here? If there were still enjoyments in the world, why should I have their thoughts coffined with me? But would I be forgotten? Oh no! I would have my memory recalled like a strain of remembered music, like a pleasant landscape or a sunset, causing no sorrow when they disappear. Hitherto I have always been unable to comprehend the desire expressed so often and by so many for posthumous fame. But today, as I sat reading, the idea of my thoughts living in the minds of thousands when I existed no longer came across me with an emotion of sublimity I have rarely felt. This power to reach down, if I may say so, and connect one's self with the remotest posterity is indeed a glorious immortality. I am quite horrified to think how little I improve the time. Strange that when these few flitting years are all that we possess, we squander them in such idle pursuits, with a world of science, art and beauty before us to be explored. Would I could always remember that the moments are flying like arrows, and worlds cannot redeem one of them, that he is unworthy of life who has lived and made the world no better, and set fainting virtue no bright example. 6th. I often find that when I begin to express my thoughts they are quite new to me, or, before they are clothed in language, I cannot distinguish them. I suppose it is because I have never written them before now, and for the last year or two have not spoken them at all. My mind will collect materials, but it shrinks from the labour of putting them together. It will form the cocoons, but it does not like to spin and weave them into fabrics. Read Attila. I like the character of Ildika. After the scenes of terror she passed through, the voice of her lover had no music for her, and she retired to the solitude of a convent, though no obstacle prevented her union. I can conceive it. When the events of our lives call out an unnatural energy, the moment we become conscious of a superhuman power to meet and battle with our fate, that moment life assumes a new aspect. Gifted with a strange power, breathing in a rarer spirit, we are forced against our wills above the passions and feelings whose slaves we once were, and doomed from our elevation to behold them diminish in magnitude and lustre. Alas for that elevation! Alas for that human heart! It is dreadful to think how I have wasted all my life. The next 3 months I mean to improve vigorously. The mind is acted on by laws like matter, and the more resistance we overcome, the more we have the power of overcoming. If I were to measure the momentum of my mind, however, by the force required to put it in motion, it would be tremendous. It is idle to regret the past. The future I can control. But am I quite sure of that? How do I know that we are not made for a certain destiny, as a watch to strike so often? How this question of destiny haunts me. It is better to act than to speculate, however. I laugh outright often at the stupid wonder that overcomes me when I begin to think, but I oftener cry. Commence the history of Rome. What a divine power is this of acquiring knowledge! Though I often ask myself, what from this barren being do we reap? Surely it is not so barren. We should be thankful for the boon of existence, had we but this one faculty of acquiring knowledge, that is, as I happen to feel just now. Add to this the countless pleasures of eye and ear, of the affections and the senses, and who shall say he is miserable? What a beautiful bond of union is mind! How it carries us back and unites us with the great spirits of the past! Ages have trodden down their graves, worms have eaten their very dust, yet their thoughts live. Ethereal and imperishable, they float down the awful current of time, while empires and men are swallowed in its mysterious depths. And I, but a bubble on this mighty ocean, I can comprehend these thoughts, can sympathize and unite my own with them, can make them a part of me, and feel that they at least will be immortal. 8th. I have always delighted in that story of Bulwer's in The Pilgrims of the Rhine, called The Life of Dreams, where a young German student succeeds in continuing a dream night after night, till at length it becomes the reality, and real life the dreaming state. Why, since the beings of the actual world are such, should we not betroth to ourselves the beings of the mind? Speak to them, they answer in our own tongue. Love them, and the glowing page tells us eloquently that they would have loved. Is love a dream or a reality? Once I believed in love, how devoutly! But was not this love of the imagination? I think it was. Yet it is the highest feeling of which our nature is capable. I say it is the love of the imagination, yet I know not that. We call it so, perhaps, because lovers are not often under its influence for a long time. They seem to discover that they have loved an ideal instead of a reality, and then they graduate their love accordingly. This everyday's experience proves, but it does not, after all, disprove the existence of love. How much I have dreamed of love when I was younger, and more poetical than I am now. I have looked on the dewdrops and seen them by some strange sympathy draw nearer and nearer, and mingle into one. I have seen floating blocks of inanimate matter, without any apparent cause, advance till they united. I have heard the strings of a guitar, when you spoke on the key to which it was attuned, thrill back a corresponding tone. I have watched the electric cloud whirling through space, stormy and dark, giving no brightness, and uttering no voice till it met its sister cloud. And I turned in bitterness of soul to ask myself if amid all these sympathies of nature, the human heart only was doomed to wander on in its pilgrimage desolate and alone. And is it indeed so? Are all these aspirations and desires to be mocked by the seeming of love, as the mirage of the desert mocks the thirsty traveller with green spots and flowing streams? I have struggled against this conviction, but I feel that this love is too elevated for humanity. We may desire, but we cannot attain it. Earliest, brightest, and last of my delusions, I resign thee. I turn from thee as from a guiding star. Pale, steady, and bright, thou hast beamed on my dark horizon, and now thou settest forever. As the idolater, knowing not the true God, lavishes his adoration on some object of his own creation, and invests it with the attributes of the deity, spirit of love, even so have I worshipped thee. I have worshipped thee, and thou art but a phantom of my own mind. Renounce my idolatry. Sweet, radiant dream, throwing over life an ideal drapery, thou comest no more to me. The touch of reason has broken the spell that bound thee to me, and now thou departest forever. March 9th. I am delighted with Gibbon. Though I have such a grand plan marked out for study, I cannot follow it up with half the perseverance I wish. Can I not throw off this torpor by exertion, as travellers keep awake in frozen regions? Where to sleep is not to wake again. In this case, sleep is death also. For what is it to live without the exercise of our powers, like toads that lie buried for years in rocks? I choose to come out, if it is only like the toad, to hop round a little and take the air. Spring has come again with her warm south winds, her loosened waters and melting snows. What a perpetual miracle is this change of seasons! How they roll on and bear me with them! For some weeks I have not thought of death. Would it not be well to set apart a few minutes every day to reflect on it? 11th. With such a delightful course of study before me, how can I weary as I do? It must be that I have no natural fondness for it, but have been driven to it by circumstances. I have long known that I must not place my hopes of happiness in others. Death follows in the rear of the unfaithful, and snatches up the few that remain to us. And how melancholy a thing is this change! There has been a friend that we loved, with whose heart our own accorded, and like well-tuned instruments they gave not a discordant note. We part years, intervene, we meet again, but oh, with what sinking of heart to find that we are strangers. Different scenes and thoughts have turned the currents that ran so smoothly together, and they mingle no longer. That is a bitter and melancholy hour, more bitter and melancholy than death itself. For if death takes those we love, their memory remains fresh and beautiful, and on that we can repose. But the estranged, the cold, the changed, it were well if we could blot out their memory. As I was saying then, our friends die and change, we ourselves grow old, and as the vigour of our youth decays, and the flowers of our spring wither, some objects must supply their place. And where shall we find them if not in our own minds? And what shall these objects be if not the cultivation of taste and the acquisition of knowledge? These make us independent of time and place. Like the camel in the parched desert, we bear within us the fountain to supply the wants of our solitary pilgrimage. Thus refreshed and invigorated, we patiently travel on, while those around us languish beneath the storm, or die of the feverish thirst. One might ask, will not this course make you selfish by putting you above the necessity of sympathy? No, not more than is necessary. Why, when we find nothing to lean upon, should we not support ourselves? I have been too dependent. Like the harp that responds to every breeze, so has my inmost soul vibrated to every adverse breath of unkindness, injustice, and change. Is it not time, then, that the instrument were new-strung, and the chords made of sterner stuff? Since the midsummer of my life is departing, let it bear with it, like the summer of earth, its perishing flowers. bright, beautiful aspirations of my youth. Yearnings for that love a God only can satisfy, for that sympathy that earth will never give. Radiant and white-robed dreams, ye leave me now forever. Go with the youth that cherished you, and the tears that flowed at your coming. 12th. I find myself even now, with all my improvements, often debating whether this mortal coil is in truth a desirable appendage. A sudden weariness of life comes over me, and I could lie down like a tired child and weep away a life of care. But I know this is wrong. I know that it is better to live. We are endowed with beautiful sympathies and divine faculties. We can love and pity, we can think and imagine, and paint those imaginings in words and colours. We can perceive the harmony and beauty of the world about us, and is not this worth living for? And on the arch that history builds over the gulf of the past, we can wander back to remote antiquity and trace the nations of our kind while they sleep under the weight of centuries. What are our wars and sufferance? What if the world is unkind, our friends indifferent, and our affections water but the desert? Nature is true, in the calmness of the sunshine, the terror of the storm, in the beauty of the insect and the flower, in the mysteries of the stars, and in the action of her unchanging laws. Does she not alike reveal herself beautiful to our gaze and worthy of our contemplation? Then come those beings of the mind that people the visions of the poet, and minister to those finer wants of our nature that reality overlooks. Then there is the power of doing good to those around us. With such objects before you, will you call life a burden, when a few brief years at most will deprive you of it? Let me then turn aside this morbid sensibility and pass at once from the dreaming and sentimental girl to the active, resolute and high-souled woman, chastened and subdued by thought and adversity. Today I finished the reign of Diocletian. Is it not strange that history presents but two instances that I recollect of men wearied with the glitter of a throne, voluntarily descending from their elevation? When Maximian remonstrated, Diocletian replied, "You would not wonder if you could see my cabbages grow." Is it not a proof that we are low in the scale of being, this fact that anything like greatness of mind, nobility or generosity strikes us as something so strange? The world gazes in as much astonishment to see a man perform a really generous action, as if he had suddenly mounted in the air on wings. It must be a low state of existence when the beautiful, the holy, and the elevated excite such emotions of novelty, rather than that which is base, cowardly, and low. The latter surround us like the air we breathe. Show us the contrary, and we wonder and praise. Praise a good action, praise virtue, praise a man because he has done just as he should do. 13th. A lost day. 14th. Almost as bad. I fail to keep constantly before my mind the idea of the shortness of life and the certainty that I must die. How every disappointment and petty vexation is swallowed up in that awful truth. What a panacea for all ills! How cheerful, how happy I am after thinking of it! It gives my thoughts a freedom they never had before, and my mind a calm and delightful elevation. I say it does this when I think of it, and I was just wondering why it is so little in my thoughts. Perhaps the reason is that it is unnatural to one of my years and temperament. Hitherto I have rebelled, now I submit. Since life was so fair, I was disappointed that it was not paradise. I have overlooked the actual good and clamoured for the imaginary. 15th. Despite philosophy and everything else, there have been 2 or 3 hours today when life was almost insupportable. Suddenly the fit passed off and left me as light-hearted as it found me. How many thousand times has this sickness come over me, and I have wept till my tears were exhausted. It is a strange state, this abandonment of despair. Friends, foes, art, nature, the beautiful, the deformed, all disappear in the blackness that enshrouds me. Indifference to life, death, heaven and hell takes the place of my warm affections and lively perceptions. Formerly I felt this often, but of late more rarely. As I have said before, it is not imagination but truth that produces this effect, and the error is in allowing ourselves to think upon that which maddens and overwhelms us. As in crossing some awful precipice, the only safety is in fixing your eyes on some distant and motionless object, neglecting which you are precipitated into the abyss. So in passing through life, if the soul is diverted from heaven and repulsed from earth, concentrated in herself and intent on her slender foothold, she reels with fearful giddiness, and perhaps in madness plunges into the gulf of the unknown future. Another week is gone irrevocably. How strange that it should startle us no more. Silently and steadily the days glide along, stealing from us our youth, digging our graves, and hastening our footsteps towards them, and we, fools that we are, heed not the swift-winged messengers. Ye fleeting hours, particles of this existence that is wasting so rapidly away, shall I permit you to depart with no record that you have passed over a being like myself, when, like the south wind that sweeps over the flowers, your wings should be laden? 16th. Today I have read over some old letters, relics of love and life's enchanted spring, and thought of my old friends, the dead and the changed, for change or death has them nearly all. I held in my hand words traced on the most perishable material, yet even they had satisfied the hearts that dictated, the hands that transcribed them. I read over the gushing and glowing thoughts of those who are now as changed and cold to me as I to them, but whom I once met, delighted and delighting, bitter, melancholy truth that neither love nor friendship endures. Time sweeps over and buries all, as the clouds of sand sweep over the plains of Egypt, burying her magnificent monuments and gradually entombing the pyramids themselves. As the excavator among these relics removes the sand and soil and stands in the presence of the past, so I have today communed with these spectres of love and friendship. I wish to write here every day, for I think when I have nothing to say, it is evidence that the day has been wasted, and who is so rich that he can afford to lose a day? Today I have painted. What delightful arts are painting and poetry! With the one we can delineate the forms, and with the other the emotions of beauty. 17th. I have just been reading 2 or 3 of Hazlitt's essays, where he expresses my feelings almost in my own words. How delightful thus to meet with a soul that responds to mine, though thousands of miles intervene between the countries of our birth, and beyond rises the impassable barrier of the grave. As I was walking along on the shore today, I found myself musing on a notorious instance of unkindness, and asking myself, what have you to expect from such a world? Which I think was a very silly question. Of course I have nothing to expect. And do I ask a reward for whatever good I might chance to do, in the shape of kindness or gratitude? Are my virtues to be sold even at such prices? Then are they paltry indeed. No, I have nothing to sell. Whatever good I can do should be done freely, without hope of reward. If I would live aright, self-sacrifice is the first lesson I must learn. What a low motive for being good, the hope of a reward. And even if it were not a low motive, it would be a very useless one, inasmuch as the reward is seldom forthcoming. The greatest benefactor of the race, men crucified. Let me endeavour to imitate his divine humility and love, and his utter abnegation of self. I continue to read Gibbon. When I think of those massacres of thousands, each one of whom was a creature like myself, and follow the gradual but irresistible march of ages as they move on, bearing down empires and trampling on humanity as on dust, how do I shrink into nothingness? Often after reading history, a mental giddiness comes over me. and the world and the things in it seem gliding like a moving panorama before me, as, after sailing a long time, when we stop, the room takes the motion of the boat. 25th. This is our first spring day. How delightful it has been, and yet there is always something melancholy in this season to me, the saddest of the year. I just now returned from an hour's sitting on the rock by the shore, watching the sunset. Surely none could be more lovely, Italian or any other. I leaned my head back and half closed my eyes. The clouds seemed like islands in some land of enchantment, islands in land. And while I sat watching, one after another faded, till at last they were gone, and all was grey. B's idea of perfect happiness is floating on a cloud with the one we love. Dreamy enough, yet I could not give a better definition of happiness. There must be moments in love that would atone for a life of misery. That first consciousness of its presence when we feel that we adore to such refined excess that though the heart would break with more, it could not live with less. To feel this must be to feel the concentrated poetry of existence. In the desert of life, love is the oasis that we pine to reach. That reaching, we weep to part from, and to which we still turn back with longing, lingering look. As the time approaches for me to leave this place, I grow so impatient that it seems to me the next fortnight will never pass. How 2 years of solitude and study have changed me. How gay I was once, how subdued and sedate I am now. Those that have known me before will scarcely recognize me now. In thinking over the list of my early friends, how many have gone to their last repose? Only a few weeks since, H among others. She was my earliest friend. How many giddy hours I have frolicked away with her. Yet the last time we met, how cold was our meeting, how tearless our parting. We had grown strangers. Tomorrow I shall leave this abomination of desolation forever. It will cost me some pain to do so, notwithstanding it has scarcely afforded me a happy moment for the last 2 years that I have vegetated here. Perhaps I shall be like the old prisoner released from the Bastille, who came back and begged to die there. This is the last page of my journal. I close this and my exile together. The end.